Hello and welcome back to Indie Book Talk. Today we have Audrey Hanagan, who is the author of The Case of the Canine Capers, and I love the alliteration in this title. I just want to say it over and over like a tongue twister.
It's
Uh,
adorable.
Before I get completely distracted, hello Audrey, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, definitely. So I just read the case of the now I don't remember the name. Case
Canine
of the
Capers.
Canine Capers. um, and I know a little bit of your backstory, but would you share for the audience like what drove you to write this story?
Sure. So I would say the catchphrase is representation matters. I grew up in a small Midwest town in the 1970s. Not a lot of options for any of the kids kind of in my local area. It was become a school teacher, join the army, work at the local grocery store. But one of the things that I really captured my attention during that time was I started reading a lot of books, and especially the Nancy Drew mystery series. And it just opened this world of possibilities for me. Reading about the strong, adventuresome, courageous, independent woman, who was about my age, who was off, solving mysteries, flying to different cities, driving her little roadster cars, standing up to adults and being able to figure out kind of who stole the clock, who was who ran me off the road. It created this um, kind of the visual of there are other options for me, there are other things that I can do. It just opened my mind to the possibilities, and that belief in myself, that belief in there are other possibilities, other paths that I can follow, has followed me throughout my entire career. It inspired me to leave home at 17 to go to the United States Military Academy and join the Army for 8 years and jump out of airplanes and live in two different international countries. It was just this seeing the representation of a strong female character inspired me to become the person that I am today. But one of the things that was always missing for me is, in the 1970s, it's all, boy meets girl, Jack and Jill, Jane and John. It's all heteronormative.
Mhm.
I didn't figure out that I was part of the LGBT community until I was in my 20s because I never met anybody. I didn't know anybody like that growing up. I didn't see it represented in the literature that I read. So
Hmm.
part of the inspiration for the case of the Canine Capers was reimagining the Nancy Drew series, but with LGBT representation. But it's not a in your face activism, fight against the world type of representation. It's just the sense of these are normal kids. This is just another aspect of their normal personalities, like hair color or height or nationality. It's just a part of their backstory, but it gives that representation of, hey, this is normal. There are people like this everywhere, and this is fine. It's just another normal aspect of their personality to give that representation to that next generation growing up.
Yeah, I have to say, like I said, I just read it not too long ago. Um, and having read the description of that you were trying to represent the LGBTQ community, I was expecting it to be like more upfront. But
Mm,
I was very pleased to find that it was a non-issue in the book. Like you didn't like shine a spotlight on it. It was like halfway through the book and it was just like casually mentioned and then a few other things mentioned here or there. It was no different than them introducing, their boyfriend Bob. It was
right.
it was very well done. And I thought it was a great representation of what you were trying to pull off.
Thank you. So I've got the second book just came out right before the Christmas holidays. It's called The Secret of Smuggler's Inn. And I'm now starting to work on the third book, which is The Trouble at Big Timber Lodge. So yeah, I like alliteration. Um,
Me too.
and I'll weave a little bit more of the community into some of the later stories, but again, it's going to be a backstory. It's not going to be the main plot or the main character flaw that has to be kind of overcome in the character. It's just representation of the community going about their normal kind of everyday lives.
I think that's so important too because there's this danger that every story that has LGBTQ members becomes like about coming out or
Mhm.
about the struggles of being in that community.
Mm.
And it gets tiring after a while. Like sometimes you just want to read a story where somebody like you is just living their life and,
Right.
doing something that's not directly related to a struggle or, a challenge. I see that too in um like the plus size community, people talking about
Mhm.
being healthy at any size and all of that stuff. And then when you have a main character who is bigger than a size 2, suddenly it's like the whole plot is about that and
Mhm.
about and there that's a thing, but it doesn't have to be the only thing. So
Right.
I really like this idea of and this quest to sort of present this community in a way that's just these are who these people are and we don't have to make it a big deal because it's just normal. It's just life.
Well, I was
Especially
really
for a young adult.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was really struck a number of years ago when, Obama was in the White House and now Kamala Harris. And you'd see these stories of, little kids who would just be in awe of, hey, there's somebody who looks like me. And there's no
Mhm.
big conversation and there's no, moral story kind of behind it. It's just this person looks like me. I saw commercials recently for, The Little Mermaid,
Mhm.
reimagined. And again, it was the focus of the commercial was just they look like me, they have hair like me, they talk like me. And it's
Mhm.
the sense of, I am normal, I am part of kind of culture. I am not just a minority, I am not just kind of, relegated to the sidelines, I am a part of society. That's
Mhm.
that's where representation really kind of matters. I was listening to a podcast just recently, and it was talking about the latest iteration of chatbots. And they had the story where, the new artificial intelligence is, it takes, all the books that have ever been written are, programmed into the computer. And then
Mhm.
you can feed in questions like, write a romance story about, two
Mhm.
people living in Vancouver. And it will actually write a story, but it's aggregating the collective set of literature that was kind of fed into the program to create kind of an average story. And it was well written, but one of the key points that they talked about was the potential for inherent bias in the system.
Mhm.
Because if the majority of the literature that you feed into the system, it's going to create stories that reflect that majority view or that cultural norm. So
Mhm.
I think it becomes even, more important in the future that there are stories like this that have representations of minority perspectives or different points of view, because if you're looking for, if we're going to have chatbots starting writing books in the future, you want to
Oh,
feed
don't say
in
that.
more diverse characters so that it has a wider range of information that it can aggregate to come up with these stories.
Yeah, we don't want AIs writing our stories. No.
No, we don't.
No. But I mean, it's true of the human mind too, right? If you expose the human mind to enough situations, as you found out when you joined the army and went off and lived in all these places, you expand your mind by being in new situations, by meeting new people. And so when we give people diverse stories, we're expanding the collective consciousness and making more possibilities for people
Right.
that maybe they never noticed before or thought were available to them.
Right. And again, it doesn't have to be big stuff. I read a book a couple of years ago that was set in Ashland, Oregon, and they were talking about the Shakespeare Festival that runs in Ashland every year. I was like, oh
Mhm.
my God, I've never read about this. I'm 50 years old. I've never heard about Ashland or the Shakespeare Festival, and I love Shakespeare. So we made a point of making a trip to Ashland just to go see the Shakespeare Festival, and it was phenomenal. They had this amazing kind of venue, and the whole town was kind of centered around it. But again, but for that book that I had read, never
Mhm.
would have known it was a thing. So, it's just this expanding our minds to there are more opportunities and potential things we could do out there. And this is just giving you inspiration for who you could become or what you could do.
Now, have you had any, because I feel like this always happens, that somebody will come out and go, oh, but your book isn't gay enough. It's not black
Mhm.
enough. It's not, disabled enough. Like
Mhm.
people want this particular definition of whatever they identify as. Have you had anybody pushing in that way, or do people seem to be just happy to read the book and enjoy the mystery?
So far, the response has been really positive. Nothing like that has come up. I was actually worried when I first wrote the books and published them that I would get the opposite, that people would, buy the book and start reading it thinking it was heteronormative, and then, be surprised and shocked that it was, LGBT
Mm,
characters, and then be upset and, post bad reviews. This is not what I was expecting. I haven't gotten any of that either. Most of the
good.
responses that I have got have just been more about the hey Audrey, this was better than I expected. We didn't have high expectations for you as a writer, but this wasn't bad. So I've been getting
I'll
more of
take
those
that.
responses. The pacing is good, the story is good. A nice tight character. I'm happy with that feedback. I haven't gotten enough wide distribution to get a little bit more of kind of the either of the two ends of the extremes so far.
Give it time. There's going to be some eventually.
Yep.
It's going to happen. So that brings me to what brought you to start writing? Was it because you wanted to tell this story or because you like writing in general?
I actually convinced myself for decades that I hated writing. And I was in between two jobs. I had kind of the summer off, and my partner just kept teasing me. As you can see, I've got this is the start of my library. My dream growing up is to have a whole room with just, bookshelves lining kind of the walls.
As
So
it should
she
be.
As it should be. So she kidded me around the fact of, you've read enough, you've bought enough, and you've read enough books. You should be able to start cranking these out, instead of buying the entire library or the entire bookstore every time you go in. So I had the summer off. I had a little bit of time. I started it. And what I realized is I actually love writing. I hate writing when I don't have inspiration. I hate writing
Mm.
when it's kind of you have to write on this topic that I have absolutely no interest in it. But I gotta say, I've been writing for about the last 3 years, different books that are in various stages of publication, and the
Mhm.
writing bug has completely bitten me. I'm already starting to work on, whether the next two books that I can write in 2023. So I'm a late bloomer to this particular craft, but I absolutely love what I'm doing.
Now that doesn't take away from being able to buy out the whole bookstore, though. You can still totally do that while writing.
I
No,
need
it's
inspiration and
research.
ideas. It's research.
Very cool. So you did the independent publishing? You self-published?
I did. I tried to go the traditional route for the first couple of years, but I basically got impatient with the process and worried that I had too much of a backlog of books that were waiting to be published, and I needed to clear my plate, so to speak, so I had room to focus on the next books that I was thinking of. So I went ahead and did the indie route. I published on Amazon this summer. I just published through Draft to Digital, and the process today is head and shoulders over the horror stories that I heard 5, 10, 15 years ago. It really does create a whole world of possibility for independent writers to be able to publish their work. The whole challenge on the back end is the marketing aspect of how do you get your book in front of enough people that you get enough people who are willing to fork over a little bit of money to kind of buy it. So I'm still struggling on the marketing side. So my partner calls it my little vanity projects that keep me occupied while she's off, earning money to pay the mortgage and the rent. But it keeps me busy, and it's a fun little hobby.
Yeah, being an author isn't going to get most people rich.
But it sure is fun.
Yeah.
Have you done any marketing that you feel like, oh, that kind of worked? Or are you really still in that early stage of like, okay, how do I do this?
Yeah, I'm still very much kind of in the early phases. I've tried a couple of different techniques just to kind of kick the tires and kind of test out what might work. Tapping friends and families, using Facebook networks, LinkedIn networks. Um, I tried finding Facebook groups that have book recommendations, young adult, book writers. I've done postings through there, but there's so many people, you just kind of get lost in kind of the masses.
Mhm,
I just recently started trying Amazon ads, and I'm still kind of playing around with the bid and the dollar limit per day and the keywords. I'm getting a
mhm,
little bit better response with the Amazon ads than I did through the Facebook post. Um,
mhm.
but yeah, tapping into your network, friends and families, getting referrals, a cousin who used to be a teacher who's connected with a local bookstore and a teachers association. That's a better route for me than anything else that I've tried.
Well, as Emma keeps insisting, it's best to get your face out there live in front of people. So you could always do an independent bookstore nearby or a book signing or, read a chapter to a bunch of YAs that come in for a group or something.
I
She
love that I
insists it's
don't have to
good.
say this anymore, and it's like become Shelley's earworm. Now she's saying it for me. I love that. I was actually going to say, Audrey, that you would be a great speaker because you've had
Mhm,
a really interesting life even before the whole publishing a book thing. So I
mhm.
think lots of kids would be really interested to hear what you have to say. You could bill yourself as a speaker to local schools. Um,
Definitely.
yeah, that's a fun route too because you get to actually see and talk to the kids and hear their
Mhm.
stories, and it's always enlightening to hear the kids' stories told back to you.
Then you have to deal with that whole I'm an introvert. I like being a hermit. That would
See?
put me out in public. I,
Yeah,
I gotta
there's
I gotta
that.
work myself up to something like that. Like, I took the first step. I've got my book into the local library. I want to,
Oh, good.
go and take a picture of my book on the bookshelf to prove that it actually happened, and then I can approach the front desk and offer to do a reading for them. So I gotta
So
work myself up to this.
so I'm gonna get back to that. So that brings up a good question. How did you get your book in the local library? Did
This
you
is
donate it or
No, this is unique to kind of my local area. So I live in Vancouver, Canada. We're part of the Fraser River Valley kind of library network, but they
Mhm.
have a program to promote independent local authors. So you can submit your book.
Ooh.
They'll put it in this program. They'll buy a couple of copies and they'll put it in
Mhm.
circulations, for about a year. But they'll promote it as local independent author. So that was the way
That's
in which
cool.
it took them like 2 days to make a decision and come back and say, oh yeah, and the criteria was, are you Canadian? Do you live in this area? Do you have a book? Yes.
Hey,
More
librarians who are
libraries.
listening, do that. We
Yeah,
like this. This is a good
that is
plan.
awesome. We gotta get a hold of someone that does that so we can get them on here.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's great, publicity for you. But I'm totally on board with the whole introvert speaking in front of people thing. I swear when I first do it, Emma's gonna have to fly down to Virginia and stand beside me and be like,
I
"Speak."
will. I'll be your hype man. I'll show up and be like, okay, everybody, it's Shelly. Like they do on
Oh dear
the
God.
the guy who comes and warms up the crowd. Yeah,
Well,
I'm
So
good at
yeah,
this.
and
we'll just
the
fly out to Vancouver and be your wingman there, Audrey. We'll just
Yes.
and the irony is, I actually worked in a global financial organization for about 20 years, and my job
Mhm,
was I was a corporate leadership development trainer. So I'm used to standing up in front of large groups of people, but every time
mhm,
I do it, it's a bit of a take a deep breath. It's going to be okay.
mhm.
Get through the day. So
Oh, I speak all the time for my job. I go to conferences and speak, but not about my creative writing. That's a whole different ballpark.
Somebody should hire themselves out as like an author's face where like no, this is a great idea. You go to a book event, right? And the author's there and they'll sign the books, but the author's face gets up and tells the story of the author so the author doesn't have to.
There
This
you
is
go.
great. If anybody wants to hire me to do this, send us an email. Uh indiebookpodcast@gmail.com. We'll do it. It'll be fun.
And then the author just has to stand up and go, "Hey, it's her." Just
This is Shelly, and then you can just be like, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
okay.
it's great. It's a good idea.
So, all right.
I've
So,
distracted
Audrey,
us.
I was leaving you a chance to ask a question, but I'll jump in. So, you say you're working on the next books as well as other series,
Yes.
and you've already got a couple going more for your version of the Nancy Drew. I don't. Do you have a series name?
The Madison Steele Mysteries.
Okay, good. What else are you working on?
So, the other book that I'm working on is a nonfiction book. It's kind of part memoir, part leadership development kind of theory. So, I was at West Point, I was in the Army for 8 years. Um, I have a good friend of mine that I went to high school with reached out to me a couple of years ago and goes, "Hey, my daughter is about to go to West Point. Haven't talked to her in 30 years."
Mm,
But it really kind of got me thinking about my time in the military and my time at West Point. Um, and I wanted to create a bit of a letter to my younger self of what did I learn through that experience of going to West Point and being in the Army that I have applied in the corporate world in leadership development. And it ended up turning into this 340-page behemoth of all of my stories of stupid things that I did in my 20s when I was in the military. A little bit of the leadership development theory around what explains why it works or why it turned out the way it did, why we kind of went off the rails, and then how that also applies to the corporate world. So, working in a large global bank, the same principles apply. So, the working title is "Leading by Example: Everything I Learned in the Army." Uh, Everything I know about leadership I learned in the Army. Something along those lines.
Okay.
Okay, so if people want to follow up on that book when it comes out and or keep track of you and what you're doing with, tell me the name of the series again?
Medicine Steel Mysteries.
The Medicine Steel Mysteries, then where can they find you on the internet?
The easiest way is Facebook. So I'm on Facebook as Audrey Hanagan. I also have a
Okay.
LinkedIn account where I have more of my kind of professional kind of credentialing, but Facebook is probably the easiest way to do it.
All right.
So you don't
So
have a
everybody,
separate author Facebook, you just have your main Facebook.
Correct. Yeah, I haven't created a separate one, but I created it 3 weeks ago in anticipation of this podcast because I knew you were going to ask me that question.
so go be among Audrey's first friends on Facebook, everyone, and keep poking her so she'll write more books, and maybe get out and do some speaking or something. I mean, just saying.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for being on the show, Audrey. It was a
Yes, thank
pleasure
you.
to talk to you.
Thank you very much.